The massive viewing ports of Nexus Prime Academy stretched across the station's outer ring, offering a breathtaking view of the Andromeda Spiral. Jae-woo compressed his face against the cool metal wall outside the Advanced Stellar Navigation classroom, trying to calm his racing heart. Through the transparent aluminum, he could see distant stars twinkling like diamonds scattered across black velvet. He checked his worn chronometer. Class had started 5 minutes ago, but he'd been standing here, gathering courage. The other students were already inside, probably discussing their weekend trips to luxury resort planets or their parents' latest business acquisitions. Jae-woo smoothed down his faded academy uniform, the fabric soft from too many washes, and like his classmates' crisp, tailored outfits with designer modifications, his bore the standard issue patches and basic rank insignia. Taking a deep breath, Jae-woo activated the door sensor. The classroom fell silent as he entered, 20 pairs of eyes turning toward him. The scent of sea salt and ocean brine that clung to his clothes seemed to fill the sterile, recycled air of the station. Mr. Kim, Professor Velthar's voice carried a slight hiss, characteristic of his Dracorian heritage. How gracious of you to join us. The 8-foot-tall reptilian instructor's scales shimmered under the artificial lighting, their blue-green hue shifting as he moved, his elongated head tilted. Yellow eyes focusing on Jae-woo with predatory precision. Jae-woo hurried to his usual seat in the back corner, past rows of floating holographic displays showing complex star charts and navigation equations. His classmates watched him with a mixture of amusement and disgust. Hyojin Park, seated in the front row, whispered something to her friend Min Se-young, both girls giggling behind their hands. As I was saying, Professor Velthar continued, manipulating the central holographic display with graceful movements of his clawed hands. Proper stellar navigation requires precise calculations and, more importantly, refinement of mind and body. One must maintain the highest standards of. The professor's words trailed off as his nostrils flared, his forked tongue flaked out, tasting the air with obvious revulsion. Several students near Jae-woo began to shift uncomfortably, some covering their noses with their sleeves. What is that absolutely disgusting odor? Professor Velthar's voice rose, echoing off the curved walls. His scales darkened to a deeper green, a sign of agitation in his species. It smells like rotting marine life. The classroom erupted. In nervous laughter, Jae-woo sank lower in his seat, wishing he could disappear into the floor plating. The smell wasn't that bad. It was just the honest scent of Earth's oceans. The salt air and seaweed that had been part of his life since childhood. Oh my stars, Hyojin Park gasped theatrically, pulling a silk scarf from her designer bag and pressing it to her nose. It's absolutely revolting. Like someone dragged a dead fish through a sewage treatment plant. I think I'm going to be sick. Added time in Choi, the son of a prominent starship manufacturer. He activated his personal air filtration unit, an expensive device that most students couldn't afford. Professor Velthar's reptilian eyes swept the classroom before settling on Jae-woo with laser-like eye. Intensity. His clawed finger pointed directly at the mortified student. Human boar. You reek of primitive aquatic decay. The entire class turned to stare at Jae-woo, their expressions ranging from disgusted to curious to openly mocking. Some students activated their personal recording devices, no doubt planning to share this humiliation across the station's social networks. The stench is overwhelming, Professor Velthar continued, his voice growing louder with each word. It's like a primitive fish market has invaded our sterile learning environment. He approached Jae-woo's desk, his heavy footsteps echoing on the metal floor. What barbaric world did you crawl out of? I'm from Earth's fishing colonies. Yes, sir. Jae-woo managed to whisper, his voice barely audible above the snickers of his classmates. Fishing colonies. The professor's laugh was harsh and grating. Of course, that explains the primitive odor of decay and maritime filth. He leaned closer. His reptilian features twisted in disgust. Stand up. This instant, Jaewoo's legs felt like water as he slowly rose from his seat. His face burned with shame as every student in the room focused on him. The holographic star charts continued to rotate silently, their beauty now seeming to mock his humiliation. Your stench is disrupting my lesson and contaminating the learning environment, Professor Velthar declared, his voice carrying throughout the room. Remove yourself immediately. I will not have my classroom turned into some primitive earth fish market. As Jaewoo began gathering his books and data tablets with trembling hands. The professor's tirade continued. Perhaps if your fisherman father spent less time wallowing in those filthy earth oceans and more time on proper hygiene and civilization, you wouldn't contaminate respectable spaces with your primitive stench. The words hit Jaewoo like a physical blow. His father worked harder than anyone he knew, providing for their family and serving their community with honor. But here, surrounded by the children of wealthy core world families, those sacrifices meant nothing. Take that disgusting smell with you, Professor Velthar added as Jaewoo headed toward the door. Don't return until you've learned to present yourself in a manner befitting civilized society. The door hissed shut behind Jaewoo, cutting off the sounds of laughter and whispered comments. He found himself alone in the curved corridor, the gentle hum of the station's life support systems the only sound. Through the viewing ports, the stars continued their eternal dance. Indifferent to his humiliation, he clutched his communication device, knowing he had to tell his father about this latest embarrassment. But how could he explain that? His very existence, his heritage, his family's honest work, had become a source of shame in this place of supposed learning and advancement. The dormitory corridors of Nexus Prime Academy buzzed with the usual evening activity. Students from dozens of worlds chatted in their native languages, their voices mixing with the electronic hum of translation devices. Jaewoo walked past groups of Centauria nobles discussing their families' mining operations, while a cluster of vegan techers showed off their latest neural interface modifications. His room was located in the cheapest section of the station, where the artificial gravity felt slightly unsteady and the wall panels showed signs of age. Unlike the luxury suites in the prime sectors, these quarters were barely large enough for a single bed, his study desk, and a small storage unit. The viewport was tiny, offering only a sliver view of space. Jaewoo sealed the door behind him and activated the privacy screen. The last thing he needed was his neighbors overhearing another embarrassing conversation about his latest classroom humiliation. He sat heavily on his narrow bed, the metal frame creaking under his weight. The quantum communicator was his most prized possession, a graduation gift from his father when he earned his place at the academy. The device was older than most, its casing worn smooth from years of use, but it could reach across the galaxy in seconds. He input his father's communication code and waited. Static filled the small room as the signal bounced through several relay stations, each one adding a slight delay. Finally, the holographic projector activated, casting a blue-tinted image into the air above his desk. Captain Minho Kim materialized in the small space, his figure slightly transparent but clearly visible. He appeared to be standing on what looked like the bridge of a working vessel. Behind him, Jaewoo could see the familiar sight of fishing equipment, or what he assumed was fishing equipment. Nets hung from the ceiling, and various electronic displays showed what appeared to be sonar readings and weather patterns. A Birji, Jaewoo began, but his voice caught in his throat. The shame of the day's events crashed over him again, making it hard to speak. Minho's weathered face immediately showed concern. His father had spent most of his life on the ocean, and the sun and salt air had carved deep lines round his eyes. But those eyes were sharp and intelligent, missing nothing about his son's emotional state. "What happened, son?" Minho asked gently, his voice carrying warmth despite the distance between them. "I was thrown out of class again," Jehu said, the words tumbling out. "Professor Velthar, he said I smell like fish. He made me stand up in front of everyone and..." The teenager's voice cracked with emotion. "He called me disgusting, said I reek of primitive aquatic decay." Minho's expression remained calm. But Jae-woo noticed his father's hands clench slightly. In the background, he could hear the quiet hum of sophisticated machinery, equipment that seemed oddly advanced for a fishing vessel. "He insulted you too, Abirji," Jae-woo continued, his voice growing stronger with anger. "He said maybe if my fisherman father spent less time in filthy earth oceans and more time on proper hygiene, I wouldn't contaminate civilized spaces." The whole class laughed at me for a moment. Minho said nothing. His eyes grew distant, and Jae-woo noticed them harden like steel. Behind his father, a crew member moved past carrying what looked like a standard fishing net. But the material seemed to shimmer with an unusual metallic quality. "Professor Velthar," Minho repeated slowly, as if memorizing the name. "A Dracorian, I assume." "Yes, a Birji. He's from one of the core worlds. All the instructors think humans are primitive, but he's the worst. He always finds ways to humiliate the human students, especially those of us from the outer colonies." Minho nodded thoughtfully. Through the hologram, Jae-woo could see his father's bridge more clearly. The equipment visible behind him was definitely more advanced than typical fishing gear. Complex sensor arrays lined the walls, and what appeared to be a tactical display showed star charts instead of ocean maps. "Son," Minho said softly, his voice taking on a tone Jae-woo had never heard before, "I think it's time I came to visit your school personally." "Would you like that?" Jae-woo's eyes widened with hope. "Yes, Abirji. But how will you get here? The academy is so far from Earth. It would take weeks on a commercial transport, and the cost." His father's weathered face broke into a mysterious smile. "Don't worry about that. I have a way." In the background, Jae-woo caught a glimpse of what looked like a star chart displaying the Nexus Prime system. A crew member's voice could be heard saying something about jump coordinates and stealth approach vectors. Strange terminology for a fishing operation. "But Abirji, even if you could get here, what could you do? These people don't respect working-class families. They think we're beneath them." Minho's smile grew wider, and for a moment, Jae-woo saw something almost predatory in his father's expression. Sometimes people need to be reminded that they don't know everything about the people they look down on. Behind his father, another crew member walked past wearing what appeared to be a standard fishing outfit. But Jae-woo noticed the subtle bulk that suggested body armor underneath. The man's movements were too precise, too disciplined for a simple fisherman. "There's something else, son," Minho continued. "Pack your best clothes. The formal uniform you wore to the academy entrance ceremony. Make sure everything is clean and pressed. Why, Abirji, are we going somewhere special?" Minho's eyes twinkled with secret knowledge. "Tomorrow is going to be a very interesting day at Nexus Prime Academy. Trust me on this." The transmission began to fade as the connection weakened. "I love you, son," Minho said as his image flickered, "and I'm proud of you. Never forget that." The hologram disappeared, leaving Jae-woo alone in his small room. He stared at the empty space where his father's image had been, wondering what he meant. How could his father possibly reach the academy? And why had he seemed so confident, almost amused by the situation, as he prepared for bed? Jae-woo noticed something odd in his memory of the conversation behind his father. He'd glimpsed what looked like a weapons console, and one of the crew members had been wearing what appeared to be military insignia. But that was impossible. His father was just a fisherman. Outside his small viewport, the stars continued their eternal dance, holding secrets that Jae-woo was only beginning to understand. The morning shift change at Nexus Prime Academy usually happened without incident. Students shuffled to their early classes while maintenance crews checked the station's massive fusion reactors. The artificial gravity generators hummed their familiar tune, and the recycled air carried the scent of hydroponic gardens from the agricultural levels. Jae-woo had just finished his morning workout in the basic gym facility when the first alarm sounded. A low, pulsing tone echoed through the corridors, making several alien students freeze in confusion. The Dracorian pupils hissed nervously, their scales shifting colors, while the insectoid Montari clicked their mandibles in distress. "Attention, all personnel," announced the station's AI in multiple languages. "A known vessel detected at system perimeter. All non-essential personnel report to safe zones immediately." The corridors erupted in chaos. Students who had never heard a real emergency alarm began running in all directions. Some headed for their dormitories, others toward the central hub where the Academy's emergency shelters were located. The artificial lighting shifted to yellow alert status, casting strange shadows on the metallic walls. Jae-woo found himself swept along with a crowd of students toward the main observation deck. The massive viewing area stretched across an entire section of the station, its reinforced transparent aluminum offering a panoramic view of the surrounding space. Usually, only a few students visited here during off hours, but now hundreds of bodies pressed against the barriers. "What's happening?" asked Dong Hyun Park, a quiet engineering student from the Martian colonies. His usually pale face had gone completely white with fear. "Probably just a drill," replied So Youngly, though her voice lacked conviction, the daughter of a diplomatic family from the core worlds. She was used to political tensions, but this felt different. "The Academy runs these exercises all the time through the viewing ports." Space appeared normal at first. The usual traffic of cargo ships and passenger transports moved in orderly patterns round the station, but then the proximity sensors began detecting something massive approaching from the outer system. "Look at the sensor displays," shouted Min Jun-cho, pointing to the holographic readouts that appeared along the observation deck's walls. The displays showed a contact that defied belief. Something enormous was moving toward them at incredible speed. The first sign of the approaching vessel was a distortion in space itself. Reality seemed to bend and twist as something massive prepared to exit hyperspace. The effect was beautiful and terrifying at the same time, like watching a cosmic whirlpool form in the darkness. "What is that thing?" gasped So Youngly, pressing her face against the reinforced glass. Her breath fogged the surface as she stared in amazement. Then it emerged. The vessel that dropped out of hyperspace was unlike anything most of the students had ever seen. It was a warship of incredible proportions, its hull stretching for kilometers in every direction. The ship's dark metal surface reflected the light of nearby stars, creating patterns that seemed to shift and flow like liquid mercury. "By the 7 moons of Arcturus," whispered Professor Kextel, a Centaurian instructor who had joined the crowd. "That's a Terran Defense Force flagship." The vessel was enormous, easily 5 times the size of the Academy station itself. Its hull bore the distinctive markings of the Terran Defense Force, the blue and white Earth insignia alongside symbols that represented humanity's expansion into the galaxy. But what made students gasp in terror were the weapons. Massive gun turrets dotted the ship's surface like mechanical mountains. Each weapon was larger than most civilian spacecraft, their barrels gleaming with the dark energy of particle accelerators. Shield generators created visible distortions in space around the vessel, and the glow of its fusion drives could be seen from millions of kilometers away. Those are quantum torpedoes, breathed Commander Nash, the Academy's security chief. He had appeared on the observation deck wearing his emergency uniform, his face pale with recognition. Each one could crack a moon in half. The ship's communication rays were already active, sending identification signals that made the Academy's computers work overtime to process the data. When the information finally appeared on the main display, the entire observation deck fell silent. That's the TDF Poseidon," whispered Commander Nash, his voice barely audible above the crowd's murmurs. "The flagship of the Terran Deep Space Fleet. What's it doing here?" The name sent ripples of shock through the gathered students and faculty. Even those from non-human worlds had heard of the Poseidon. It was the ship that had broken the hegemony blockade of the outer colonies. The vessel that had single-handedly held off an entire Dracorian battle fleet during the border wars. It was legend made real. On the ship's bridge, thousands of kilometers away, Admiral Minho Kim stood in his crisp white uniform. The same man who had appeared as a simple fisherman now commanded the most powerful warship in known space. His uniform was adorned with ribbons and medals that told the story of humanity's greatest naval victories: the Silver Star for valor during the Titan Rebellion, the Galactic Cross for his role in the liberation of Proxima, and dozens of others that marked him as one of the most decorated officers in human history. The bridge round him was a marvel of military engineering. Holographic displays showed tactical information from across the galaxy, while his crew of the finest officers in the Terran Defense Force worked with quiet efficiency. The ship's artificial intelligence continuously monitored threats and opportunities, its quantum processors calculating thousands of possible scenarios every second. "Sir," reported Lieutenant Commander Eugene Han, her voice crisp and professional, "the Academy is requesting identification and purpose. They're also asking why we're not following standard approach protocols." Admiral Minho Kim smiled, the same mysterious expression his son had seen during their conversation the night before. "Tell them," he said calmly, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded fleets in battle, "that Admiral Minho Kim is here to pick up his son." The communication officer's eyes widened slightly, but she transmitted the message without question. On the Academy station, the response appeared on Commander Nash's display, and the security chief's face went through a remarkable transformation from confusion to shock to something approaching panic. "Did that just say what I think it said?" So Yanli asked, reading the message over the commander's shoulder. Back on the observation deck, Jae-woo stood frozen in disbelief. His father, his fisherman father, commanded this legendary warship. The same man who had taught him to read ocean currents and tie fishing nets was an admiral in the Terran Defense Force. As the massive ship moved closer to the Academy station, its presence dominated the local space, smaller vessels scattered like frightened fish, giving the legendary warship a wide berth. The Poseidon's approach was slow and deliberate, each movement calculated to demonstrate both power and control. Tomorrow was indeed going to be a very interesting day at Nexus Prime Academy. The Academy's Grand Hall had been hastily converted into a formal reception area. Maintenance crews worked frantically to polish the metallic surfaces while decorative banners from various core worlds hung from the curved ceiling. The space could hold nearly 3,000 beings, and today it was packed beyond capacity. Students pressed against the viewing galleries above, their voices creating a buzz of excitement and fear. Faculty members clustered near the main entrance, their formal robes and ceremonial dress making them look like colorful birds preparing for flight. Even the station's automated service drones had been polished to a mirror shine for the occasion. The massive doors at the hall's entrance were designed to accommodate beings of all sizes, from the tiny pig-sized diplomats to the towering Goliath warriors. But today, they seemed almost too small for what was about to enter. A sharp blast of ceremonial trumpets echoed through the hall, played by the Academy's mixed-species orchestra. The haunting melody was a traditional Terran naval anthem, though most of the non-human audience didn't recognize it. What they did recognize was the sound of absolute authority. The doors opened with a deep, mechanical hum. Admiral Minho Kim entered first, and the transformation was breathtaking. Gone was any trace of the simple fisherman who had appeared on the holographic communication. This man moved with the confidence of someone who had commanded fleets in battle and negotiated with alien emperors. His white dress uniform was immaculate, every button and insignia positioned with military precision. Behind him came his honor guard, 12 Terran Marines in full ceremonial powered armor. Each suit stood over 7 feet tall, their servo motors whirring quietly as they moved in perfect synchronization. The armor's surface was a deep blue with gold trim, polished to such perfection that it reflected the hall's lights like mirrors. Their helmets were sealed, making them appear almost robotic. But the weapons they carried were very real. Every step echoed with authority as students and faculty parted before them. The crowd's murmurs died to absolute silence, broken only by the mechanical sound of the Marine's footsteps on the polished floor. Near the front of the hall, Professor Velthar stood with Academy Director Prexenol. The Dracorian's usually confident posture had completely collapsed. His scales, normally a vibrant blue-green, had faded to a sickly pale color, a sign of extreme fear in his species. His long neck was bent lower, and his clawed hands trembled. As he clutched a data tablet, Director Prexenol, a distinguished Centaurian with silver forearms, was trying to maintain his composure. But his usually steady hands shook as he adjusted his ceremonial robes, and his large eyes darted nervously around the hall. Admiral Minho Kim stopped 10 feet from the Academy's leadership. His honor guards spread out behind him in a perfect formation, their weapons held at parade rest but ready for action. The silence in the hall was so complete that the faint hum of the station's life support systems seemed loud. Professor Velthar, Minho said quietly, his voice carrying easily across the silent hall. Despite speaking softly, every word reached the furthest corners of the massive space. I believe you had some comments about my profession. The Dracorian's forked tongue flicked out nervously, tasting the air. I didn't know, he stammered. His usual confident voice reduced to a whisper. You didn't know what exactly? Minho's smile was cold as Arctic ice. That I've been fishing along the outer rim for the past years. The Admiral began to pace slowly, his movements predatory, fishing for intelligence on the hegemony's fleet movements. My fishing boat is actually a long-range stealth reconnaissance vessel, the most advanced ship in the Terran fleet, capable of slipping past their sensors and gathering information that has prevented 3 major wars. In the viewing gallery above, Jae-woo watched in amazement as his father continued. The same man who had taught him to tie fishing knots was revealing military secrets that could reshape the balance of power in the galaxy. The fish smell you found so offensive. Minho's voice grew stronger, more commanding. That's the scent of Earth's oceans, oceans that taught humanity how to read currents, predict weather, and navigate by the stars long before your species even looked up at the night sky. The Admiral stepped closer to the terrified professor. Those same skills that you mocked are what make humans the finest navigators in the galaxy. While your species needed quantum computers to find their way between stars, my ancestors were crossing Earth's oceans using nothing but wind patterns and wave formations. Several students in the audience gasped. The Dracorians were known throughout the galaxy for their advanced navigation technology. But here was a human claiming his people could do better with ancient techniques. The smell of salt water and seaweed. That clings to my son's clothes. Minho continued. That's the smell of wisdom, of understanding natural forces that your computers can calculate but never truly comprehend. Every human who has ever stood on a ship's deck in a storm, who has read the signs in the water and the wind, carries that knowledge in their bones. Academy Director Prexenal finally found his voice. Admiral. He spoke up nervously, his forearms gesturing in what his species considered a peaceful manner. We had no idea about your true identity. If we had known, of course you didn't. Minho interrupted, his gaze never leaving Professor Velthar. You were too busy judging my son by his origins rather than his achievements. Too busy looking down on what you considered primitive to see the excellence right in front of you. The Admiral's voice grew harder. Tell me, Professor, what are Jewu's academic rankings? Velthar consulted his tablet with shaking claws, his eyes struggling to focus on the display. He's first in stellar navigation, first in xenobiology, first in tactical studies. Go on. Minho commanded. First in quantum mechanics, first in diplomatic protocols, first in military history. The professor's voice grew smaller with each subject. First in everything. Minho finished. Despite your prejudice, despite your constant humiliation, despite being treated as inferior by instructors who couldn't match his achievements if they had 1,000 years to try, the hall erupted in whispers as students and faculty realized the implications. Jae-woo Kim, the boy they had mocked for smelling like fish, was the Academy's top student in every subject. My son carries the scent of Earth's oceans, Admiral Minho Kim declared, his voice now carrying the full authority of his rank. And that scent represents something your advanced civilizations have forgotten, the courage to explore the unknown, to read the signs others miss, and to find your way home no matter how far you've traveled. The 12 Marines behind him shifted slightly, their powered armor gleaming under the lights. The message was clear. This was not just a father defending his son, but an admiral of the Terran Defense Force making a statement about humanity's place in the galaxy. Professor Velthar's scales had gone even paler, and his legs seemed barely able to support his weight. The confident instructor who had humiliated students just yesterday now looked like he might collapse at any moment. The reckoning had begun. The morning sun simulator in the Academy's main corridors cast artificial light that mimicked Earth's stone. 1 month had passed since Admiral Minho Kim's dramatic arrival, and the entire atmosphere of Nexus Prime Academy had shifted like tides changing direction. Jae-woo Kim walked through the same hallways where he had once hid in shame. But now his steps were confident and measured. The Terran naval cadet insignia on his collar gleamed under the lights, a symbol that commanded respect from students and faculty alike. His uniform was crisp and clean, but it still carried the faint scent of salt water that had once brought him such humiliation. The advanced stellar navigation classroom looked exactly the same, but everything else had changed. Students who had once whispered behind their hands now nodded respectfully as he passed. The same viewing ports showed the same starfield, but the massive presence of the TDF Poseidon in nearby space served as a constant reminder that appearances could be deceiving. "Good morning, Cadet Kim," said Commander Nash as he entered the classroom. The Academy's security chief had been treating Jae-woo with no respect ever since learning about his faith. As true identity, the class is ready for your demonstration. Jae-woo nodded and walked to the front of the room. The same podium where Professor Velthar had once humiliated him now served as his platform to share knowledge that had been passed down through generations of Earth's seafaring families. Today, I'll demonstrate traditional Earth navigation techniques," he announced to the assembled students. His voice carried the quiet confidence of someone who had learned to be proud of his heritage. Rather than ashamed of it, the holographic display activated, showing a three-dimensional map of local space. But this wasn't the standard star chart that most navigation classes used instead. The display showed cosmic currents, gravitational flows, solar winds, and magnetic fields that swept through the galaxy like invisible rivers. My father taught me to read these cosmic currents the same way our ancestors read ocean tides, Jewu explained, manipulating the display with practice ease. Computer navigation systems can fail, get hacked, or malfunction, but these natural patterns never lie. The students watched in fascination as he highlighted different aspects of the display, so youngly, who had once covered her nose in disgust at his presence, now leaned forward with genuine interest. Her expensive designer clothes had been replaced with the standard academy uniform, part of new regulations implemented after the Admiral's visit. "See this gravitational eddy near the Vegas system?" Jewu pointed to a swirling pattern in the hologram. Most navigation computers would try to avoid it, burning extra fuel to go round. But if you understand the pattern, you can ride it like a current, saving energy and actually arriving faster. From the back of the room, Professor Velthar watched silently. The once proud Dracorian had been reassigned to teaching basic xenobiology to first-year students, a significant demotion from his previous position. His scales had never quite returned to their original vibrant color, and he rarely spoke unless directly addressed. "The key is understanding that space isn't empty," Jewu continued, his hands moving through the holographic display like a conductor leading an orchestra. "It's filled with forces and patterns that most people never notice. Dark matter streams, quantum fluctuations, the gravitational wake of planetary systems. They're all there if you know how to look." Hyojin Park, who had once been the most vocal in mocking him, raised her hand respectfully. The daughter of the mining magnate now wore the same simple uniform as everyone else. Her attitude completely transformed. "Cadet Kim," she asked, "could you teach us more about these traditional methods? I mean, how do you actually sense these patterns without instruments?" Jewu smiled, remembering how she had once called him disgusting. "Of course, but first, you need to understand something important. The smell you once found so offensive, that's the scent of Earth's oceans, and those oceans are where humanity learned to dream of sailing between the stars." He walked closer to the students, his presence now commanding rather than apologetic. "Every human who has ever stood on a ship's deck, who has felt the wind and tasted the salt spray, carries within them the knowledge of how to read natural forces. We learned to navigate by the stars before we ever built computers. We learned to predict weather by watching clouds and feeling changes in air pressure." The class listened intently as Jewu continued his lesson. Outside the classroom windows, the TDF Poseidon maintained its protective orbit round the Academy station. The massive warship's presence had become a source of pride for the human students and a reminder to others that Earth's sky children were not to be underestimated. "My ancestors crossed entire oceans using nothing but the wind, the waves, and the position of the stars," Jewu explained. "They developed an intuitive understanding of natural forces that we've carried into space. When I smell salt water on my clothes, I'm reminded of thousands of years of human exploration and discovery." Min Jancho, the quiet engineering student, raised his hand. "But how do you apply ocean navigation to space travel? The principles are the same," Jewu replied. "Whether you're reading ocean currents or gravitational fields, you're looking for patterns in the flow of energy. You're learning to work with natural forces instead of fighting against them." Far above, in the Admiral's quarters aboard the flagship, Min Ho Kim smiled as he watched his son's lecture through the Academy's public feed. The boy who had once been ashamed of smelling like fish was now teaching the galaxy's elite about the wisdom of the sea. The communication panel chimed softly. And Lieutenant Commander Eugen Han's voice filled the room. "Admiral, we're receiving new orders from Terran Command. The hegemony is moving 3 fleets toward the Centauri sector. Intelligence suggests they're planning something big." Minho stood and straightened his uniform. The same gesture his son had inherited. "Then it's time to go fishing again. Commander, set course for the Outer Rim." The bridge of the Poseidon came alive with activity as the crew prepared for departure. The massive ship's engines began their startup sequence, creating a low thrumming that could be felt throughout the vessel. Outside, smaller escort ships moved into formation, their sleek hulls designed for stealth and speed as the massive warship prepared to fold space. Jae-woo looked up from his lesson and saw his father's ship beginning to move, the running lights. That had become a familiar sight in the Academy's sky were now shifting position, preparing for the jump to hyperspace. He touched the small vial of seawater he wore around his neck. A gift from his father that reminded him never to forget where he came from. The tiny container held water from Earth's Pacific Ocean, collected near the fishing village where his family had lived for generations. "That's my father's ship," he told the class, pointing to the departing vessel. "He's going fishing again." The students looked puzzled until Time and Chor, who had once activated an air filtration unit to avoid Jae-woo's scent, suddenly understood. "He's going on another intelligence mission." Jae-woo nodded. Some fishermen cast their nets in very deep waters indeed. The TDF Poseidon disappeared in a flash of light as it folded space, leaving behind only a brief distortion in the fabric of reality. The Academy station seemed smaller somehow without the massive warship's protective presence. But the lesson it had taught remained. The smell of Earth's oceans would always be with Jae-woo. And now he wore it as a badge of honor. In a galaxy full of advanced civilizations and alien technologies, sometimes the oldest wisdom was the most valuable of all. The ND.